welcome to this Interchange webinar. And today we'll be discussing a question that's facing quite a few councils and municipalities across the country, and that's can a tram system built today meet tomorrow's customer demand? And but before we get into that, I just want to start with a couple of introductions. So my name's Philippe Crump, and I'm the head of marketing at Siemens Mobility's rail infrastructure business in the UK. And I'm joined today by our special guest, James Hammett, who's managing director from UKTram. So James, do you want to tell us a little bit about you and also about UKTram?
Hi, thanks, Philippe. Yeah, James Hammett, managing director of UKTram, as you said. I've been around the light rail industry from a very young age. I like to tell people that it's now it's coming up 35 years that I've been in the light rail industry, and to see people try and work out how I managed to be in there for quite so long. But I actually got involved in trams at the age of 10, so that kind of gives a bit of a giveaway. But I started off by doing my apprenticeship at a heritage tramway down in Seaton, down where I live in Devon. And I've worked my way through different elements of the light rail sector over the years, and have been with UKTram now for just coming up 14 years, when UKTram was reconstituted back in 2013, 2014 to be the voice of the light rail sector. And with all the tramways that were growing up at the time and being built, government realised there wasn't really one collective voice. So UKTram was in existence from about 2005, mainly as a lobbying body for more light rail. And the government said, actually, we need a central voice. We need one pot where we can be the liaison to the sector can come to, and we can go from, and that will be UKTram. And I was asked to start off one day a week just to help get UKTram going. One day became two, became three, became five, and 14 years later, there's a team of 7 of us here. So and we are here primarily to make the sector work as efficiently as it can, be the voice to government, make sure that we can add value to the sector, and make sure that what the sector is doing is fit for the end user and giving value to those that are putting in tramways and investing in it. So our day-to-days range from liaising with government right the way down to helping deal with, say, antisocial behaviour or day-to-day operational issues or technical issues on tramways. So it's a very broad remit, but that's what makes it quite so enjoyable.
Brilliant. Good stuff. Yeah, that is indeed an incredibly wide scope and wide remit. So that's brilliant. Thank you, James. And I'm also joined by Rob Thomas, who's our head of sales at Siemens Mobility's rail infrastructure UK business. So Rob, do you want to tell us a bit about you and also a bit about Siemens?
Yeah, thanks, Philippe. Before I do that, though, I just want to say a huge thank you to James for taking part in this today. Really appreciate you giving the time, and it's great to have your kind of expertise on the call. And thank you to everybody who's joined the call as well. I think you're going to kind of mention about questions in a second, Philippe, but we're looking forward to that bit of interaction at the end. So I'm Rob Thomas. I'm the head of sales, as Philippe said, for Siemens Mobility in the UK and Ireland. And just a very brief introduction of Siemens, so we'll get through this. We'll get through this quickly. Don't worry. But Siemens is a global technology company, and the focus of Siemens is transforming the infrastructure that underpins society, and that works across energy, buildings, healthcare, factories, and transport. And that's where Siemens Mobility sits. Siemens Mobility is a global company. In the UK and Ireland, we have a number of different facilities. We've invested over 300 million on Goole Rail Village, where we are building trains. We also are investing £100 million in Siemens Rail Technology Centre in Chippenham, where we deliver rail infrastructure. So that is control systems, electrification, and signalling. And we also deliver some passenger experience software, so some booking tools and some journey planning tools. Yeah, that's us.
Good. Brilliant. Okay, so just before we dive into the questions, I just want to echo Rob's thanks to the audience for joining us today, and please do use the Q&A facility in the interface in the Zoom interface to ask any questions. And I'm going to kick off with a few questions now, but please do put forward your questions, and we'll try and get to them before the end of the webinar. So I guess my first question really is to James, and it's sort of really why now? What's so important, and why is this such an important time for light rail right now?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, yeah, it's always the right time for light rail in our book. But what we've got is we've got a real want from government. They understand the benefits of light rail, and with a real focus on placemaking and looking at the wider cities and regions, they're looking at rather than light rail just being a transport system, they're looking at how it fits in that whole wider cityscape. What are the transport needs of these local regions, cities, and what can light rail do? So it's never been a better time to have that government interest. Hopefully everyone on the call understands the benefits that light rail brings for fixed infrastructure and investment and all the rest of it. But it's having that political support and the want. I've said this before, that there is not a better time to be really pushing light rail at the moment. We've got a government and local mayors that are really supporting and wanting to make a difference to decarbonisation, cities growth, boost the economy, all stuff that light rail does. So that's why it really is at a key time for us in the sector.
Brilliant. And I think that in there you mentioned the passenger and I suppose the various stakeholders, and a key part of the big question, which is can we build a light rail systems that are ready for today but also ready for tomorrow. And I guess part of that is or part of the question around that is what is driving changing customer expectations, and what does that look like sort of in the immediate future and then in the distant future?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And what we are seeing with today's movement in technology is when we always used to go and do our Christmas shopping or whatever into the shops, now it's Amazon Prime, and we can get it. We're disappointed if we can't get it next day. People are used to stuff on demand. We've got to very much look at how people are getting around. It's still too easy to go, well, it's quicker if I get in the car. We need to make sure, light rail works best as part of integrated public transport, but that is from the very beginning, from the end-to-end journey. From as soon as people walk out their front door to how they get there, and that's why it needs to be a seamless journey. And technology's got a huge part to play in that, giving you the options, giving you where to go. Light rail always scores extremely highly in customer satisfaction, over 90%, quite often over 93%, which is better than any of the transport modes. But we need to be part of that bigger transport network. We play a part in that. So it's making sure that the customer expectations, which are more now, they want to be able to get on their phones. They want the technology. They want to be able to charge their phones. They want to be able to get about, make it easy, and that's the challenge. But if you look at the way light rail has been built, all systems develop as long as they're not locked in a box, and that's what you've got. Modernisation, part of it, a tram will last 35 years, but there's refits that go through, so you can allow, being able to change the technology. Everyone went around and started putting USB chargers on them, and they've changed it to USB-C, so all the old chargers now don't fit. Silly things like that, but it all comes down to what's the customer expecting, and that expectation keeps going up with the way technology moves forward.
Yeah, and actually that brings me quite nicely onto my next question, which is, from a technological perspective, how should we use technology to adapt to those expectations? Because you're right, they kind of change, and they evolve all the time, don't they? Rob, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say you need to start with the passenger experience at the start before you start thinking about technology. The technology, kind of, my colleagues won't thank me for this, but the technology is kind of the easy bit eventually. But let's start with what the customer demands, and the fundamentals of a safety critical system don't change. We can add the kind of not the nice to haves, but the experience technologies on top of that with journey planning and all of those kind of digital things in the future that can sit on top of a core kind of fundamental system. But as I said, you've got to start with the passenger, and then obviously the transport operator or the transport authority has got to kind of distill that into what that means for the requirements of the system. You've got to go through a procurement gate. So what I'm about to say next is not as easy as it's easier to say than it is to do, but you've got to get the supplier involved as early as you possibly can, I think, in that for phrase, because then you can start to understand how technology can help, where it is going to be cost beneficial, where it's going to be too expensive to meet a requirement that you think is something that the customer wants. So yeah, I kind of think that is key, is getting the supplier involved as early as possible. And then it's getting a supplier with the right people, the right culture, and the right attitudes to work in partnership with you. I think where it works best in our business is where you've got a common purpose with a customer, and you can't almost distinguish who works for who. Certainly, we've got that in certain contracts that are really designed really well, and the procurement's been designed well. That kind of makes a massive difference in the outcome of the affordability and deliverability. And then you've got to have, I'll get to the technology in a minute, which was what your question was, but you've got to have not a fixed mindset on what technology you want to deploy. You've got to think about what the system, the customer-led system thinking is kind of my new favorite phrase. But you've got to think about what the customer needs and then what technology will meet that requirement, not just the thing you delivered last time, but a bit better and a bit quicker. And a really good example of that is what we're doing in Cardiff with Cardiff Crossrail, where we've re-signalled the core valley lines and they want to extend to have a tram it's called Cardiff Crossrail. And instead of kind of putting in a light rail system that we've done across the globe, we've extended our Westcad that's already controlling the main line in South Wales. And that is the right solution for the right situation.
If I can just add to that, sorry, Philippe, it just made me think of another point in Rob saying getting early engagement with the suppliers, and it's right the way back to the design, from the operator who's going to be operating it to the maintenance and everything, because all of that ends up to your reliability, your customer frequency. If the technology can be used to make sure it's monitoring the components on the tram, so it signals when it fails before it coming on a maintenance or anything like that, right the way back, and as you say, it's not building a system that is kind of like, well, that's how we did it last time and that was good. It's always thinking to what's coming next and what can we do more and how do we move that on. And you say it's different in every case, but it's having that open mind that is really important.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think that some of those points there actually sort of lead quite nicely into a question that's just come up in the Q&A section, which is what's required for the costs of implementing a tram or light rail system. What's required to make that fall and become more affordable, and can capex fall at least by 40 or 50% anytime soon? So that's quite a sort of a challenging figure there, but it's interesting hearing you both talk about some of those things, because potentially some of those could sort of reduce the cost of implementation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's several angles to tackle this. One of them is, in the UK, is we tend to start designs again from each tramway. They've all been built at different times, and there are different needs, as Rob said, which is important. But there should be standardisation where you can standardise. Something that we're trying to work towards within UKTram and the remit we cover, and our sister organisation, the Light Rail Safety Standards Board, who do all safety and standards, are looking at pushing into now safety by design. So there's kind of like reduce those the designing again costs, but you have to then allow for what's different in this city, what's different in this local area. But onto that, and we had the conversation before, and it comes up time and time again. In UK, we're quite often told, well, we're more expensive than abroad. Well, there are differences and there are reasons for that. In that a lot of the project costs, Birmingham is a prime example, lovely granite sets throughout the streets, and the cityscape's been done from wall to wall. Well, that gets put in the tramway cost. But actually, the tramway itself didn't cost as much to put in. In some cases, it's between 35 and 55% of the cost per kilometre is actually on the beautification of the city. It's not on the rails in the ground and the overhead line and the power. So it's really important to make sure that we are being efficient where we can be, but also to be mindful that the benefits that that system can bring and the benefits that that regeneration brings it is lumped into that cost as well. So it's not always an accurate reflection of the actual cost of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 40 to 50% might be a bit ambitious. I think part of the challenge, I think you might have a question about this in a minute, but the challenge is kind of delivering an upgrade, or it's not often that you're delivering a greenfield site, and even when you are, there's tunnels or bridges, and there's all a degree of interfacing with existing systems, so there's always a degree of complexity. And I think, again, back to my question about answer about technology, is just getting involved and getting the supplier involved early, because all of those challenges are solvable at the early enough phase. And if where we kind of work with other customers really well is, here's the budget I've got to achieve these outcomes, and now work with me to figure out what's the best way to do that. And that sometimes involves difficult kind of conversations about, well, that's not affordable if you do it with that access regime. If you want us to do all of that work in 2 hours on a Saturday night, it can't meet the budget. So it's kind of that's the way you kind of make a big difference to the CapEx cost thing.
Mm-hmm. And would you say, because there's a question about lessons learned from previous projects like Edinburgh Tram, for example? I mean, is that one of the key lessons, and are there any other lessons that can be learned from implementation?
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. Early engagement, clarity on outcomes, and again, the lesson that we learn quite often, one particular scheme I can remember is one of the projects that we delivered. We had 2% change budget, and that's because the outcomes didn't change. And I think that is a key lesson learned. If you kind of set your outcomes well enough to maybe even take a little bit more time at the start to set those outcomes, and then you have a real culture across supplier and contractor, customer and supplier, that says, I'm not going to change these outcomes. There'll be a lot of pressure along the way, and there'll be some really good ideas, but I'm delivering the outcomes that we set out, and I'm not changing it. There has to be an absolutely brilliant reason to change. I think that's kind of one of those, definitely a lesson learned, and that collaboration as early as possible.
And that then leads on to if that early engagement and that design is done right, then when you come to renewals and upgrades and stuff in the future, when you know what technology is in there, there's so much less disruption. And that's where there's a big savings, rather than, hang on, we've got to renew this now, and it's like, let's dig all the track back out or take all the signaling system out. If you have that foresight, rather than design to, this is what we need now and let's do it as cheap as we can, as you say, sometimes a little bit more time and maybe a little bit more expense on the initial design and installation can save a lifetime of costs in the future, and also keeps your options open for new technologies, different approaches, and system designs. And that's where there's a real key for lessons learned. It's happened in the West Midlands. It's happened on all the systems that have been done, and it's one of the things UKTram Centre of Excellence does. It's pulled together a lot of those lessons learned to be like, if you're doing this again, don't go down these same rabbit holes. But one of the things I think the sector struggles with the way it's set up is there's a little bit of risk aversity on new technology. So it's, let's put in what we know works. And that isn't always the best way forward, because while we know it works, it stops you then being able to innovate and bring costs down. So that is one of the challenges that the sector does face.
Yeah, that's interesting, that, because we've got a question here about the business case stage. Is the are we doing enough to make sure that the business cases are holistic enough to make the strongest case for investment? And and if not, then what could we be doing to increase that?
Yeah, I mean, this actually fits very nicely with what's happened with the setup of the Mass Transit Task Force to look at these things, look at what's slowing down, what's stopping these potential schemes coming forward. And as you say, is that shift from focus of going, this is a transport system to this is part of the whole city region development, is all of a sudden what that brings in. You're not just comparing, a bus line with a tram line. You're looking at what does that fixed infrastructure bring? What does that connected transport bring for the future of that region? Well, we all know, and all of a sudden you can scale that up in your business cases. That makes a huge difference, because all of a sudden you're not just bringing employment and industrial growth and all the rest of it, connectivity. It's put in there. We know it does that, but it's not demonstrated when you look at it as just transport. When you look at it in the development of the local economy, the city area or region, it has much bigger potential.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I think we've got there's a question here around can new street tramways be laid in Britain without diverting utilities? And I suppose that's obviously quite a specific question, but I think it does sort of bring us onto the topic of what are the challenges to implementation and I guess disruption to the operation of a city, and how do you get around that?
Yeah, that's it's a key area, and it's funny we were talking about the age of UKTram and how long it's been around, and the recent light rail conference, they asked me to look over the last 20 years, and you look at some of the topics, and some of the topics haven't changed. We move forward on some, but one of them is utilities. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd like to be able to not have to move the utilities, because that's where the biggest cost and time is involved. But you've also got technology these days, which is a lot better at sensing what is underground, because every scheme that's been built, you believe you know what's under the ground, and then you start digging, and then you find stuff under there that you weren't expecting. So you might have engaged with the utility people that you think, well, they're moving the gas and the electric, and all of a sudden you find there's telecoms cables under there that need moving as well, and the telecoms people haven't been engaged with because we didn't think it was there, and it is. And all of these things, but using technology to even survey the ground and identify, is that a fairly new water main in there? So if it is, we don't need to dig it up. We can use track slab and go over the top of it. What sort of there's systems out there that means you don't have to move all the utilities. Some you're going to have to move. It's part and parcel of the data. And the last thing you want to do is say, oh, we won't bother moving the utilities, put it over there, and 18 months into operating the system, you've got to rip the track up or take the slab out because it's burst, because it's an old main. This is where technology, understanding, scanning, there's huge potential of using tech to actually understand what's in the ground and put it into a BIM model or whatever to make that work for the future. And again, it all goes forward to cost and efficiencies of installing new schemes.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Robert, I don't know if it's worth sort of touching on the how digital twins and actually offsite testing as well.
Yeah, I guess we talked about some of the challenges in terms of expectation setting, and back to that business case question we had a second ago. I think we all probably, it would be fair to say that people undervalue the benefits of transport systems. You can see with the ridership on the Elizabeth line, that wasn't expected. The volume of kind of traffic and the positive benefits of delivering these kind of schemes is kind of undervalued. You might argue that the opposite is true, where costs kind of are undervalued as well, perhaps. So they kind of, but I think that's kind of where we talked earlier about getting suppliers involved earlier, so that you have really clear expectations at the start, and therefore you're not having those kind of difficult conversations later on, whereas I thought it was going to cost this much and blah blah blah. So I think that is one of the key challenges, is making sure that you've got that robust, deliverable business case up front. And then you're talking about utilities there, that having that one team culture and collaboration, so that the supplier, of the rail systems is not kind of pushing to, deliver things that the person who's trying to move the utilities is going, hang on, give me a bit of time and space to kind of work that through, and not having the wrong incentives to drive people to the, I'm delivering my system because I've been told I've got to deliver it by this time. Well, okay, that means I can't use the utilities. That want to avoid those we have kind of a common purpose. And then you kind of talked about digital twins and offsite testing. That is one of the key lessons we've learned from delivering the Elizabeth Line Crossrail as it was, and what we're learning from the East Coast Digital Partnership now, and what we will be doing when we kind of come to deliver HS2 is having that offsite testing capability. So we have got a rig in Chippenham. It's currently being moved from our old site to our new technology centre, and that has got every bit of kit that will sit on that railway. So it's an ETCS system, a European Train Control system. It's the signalling system that will eventually have no signals trackside on the main line. But that involves some onboard technology and some trackside technology. And currently what we're doing in our facility is bringing together all of the different supplier systems, included our competitors, and testing it off-site before we go anywhere near a live and operational railway. And that I've seen kind of calculations where they say that there are always bugs and faults and things don't talk quite as you think they would. And I've seen the calculation that every kind of time they find a fault, on average, that saves £100,000 in terms of, if you found that on site, what would it cost? We can argue that number, but it costs a lot more to fix a problem on site than it does in a rig. And that is a huge value of offsite testing, and that helps with the integration, but it also helps with the migration. So you can kind of wait until you go on site and then disrupt the railway in the minimum possible way. Hopefully you can design it so that you do it in possessions when passengers don't need the system. But if you've done the offsite planning and integration, hopefully you kind of wait to the last minute and then do the disruption. And I think the other bit is capability. That's the other challenge, is making sure that you have the people now and in the future to kind of deliver, maintain and operate those railways or the tram systems. So yeah, I think those are the key challenges on top of the utilities moving.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And there's a really interesting question that's come up about accessibility specifically, but in particular, and I think it sort of opens up the topic around how light rail systems connect with at interchanges in order to create a seamless passenger experience. Because I think obviously this is a lot about changing and evolving customer and passenger needs. And I think as those evolve, and there's no doubt about it, there's certainly a feeling across the whole of transport that it needs to be seamless, it needs to be easy. But at those interchange points, what can a tram system, and what does the tram system need to be able to do to make that experience seamless? James, I don't know if you want to.
I think we'll
start with an answer to that one.
Yeah, I mean, light rail's very, one of its key benefits is accessibility. It's level boarding. The tram always pulls up in the same spot. The difficulty we have is replicating that, as we say, when we're going across the modes, is that we're starting from the advantage, and that we've from when light rail was brought back into this country, the focus was on making sure that it's accessible for all. One of the key points is that needs probably more work from our side is what we call the last mile. It's people getting to the stations. The tram network's lovely and you can get around, and you might have a nice bus interchange or a nice railway interchange. What we need to make sure is there isn't a blocker from people getting to those stations, and that goes back to this wider picture of your city planning. Well, it's all very well having a tram stop there, but and saying you're within so many meters of a tram stop. Can people actually get to them? Is a big road to get across? Is it safe to get from there to the tram stop? Do you need to go the long way round? Is it going to inconvenience people? And I think that's where there's the biggest amount of work that we can do to try and understand what is the restriction to people there. And we tend to look at the light rail network as we design it. We've talked about doing it together collaboratively. But actually, let's wind back and let's go up to the big helicopter view of what we're trying to achieve here. We want the most people riding on this tram. Now, what are those blockers? Is the design and cityscape going to actually stop, be a case of people, well, I would use the tram, but it's one street too far over and I've got to cross that busy road, so I won't, I'll still get in the car. You need to make sure that we aren't losing people like that, that there is that, I can ride my bike to it or take my e-scooter. Don't mention e-scooters, but I can get there easily to then get on to my onward journey. And do we allow bikes on trams? For years bikes weren't allowed on trams. People have started to trial it now because we see more and more people cycling. So all of a sudden, you if you're not careful, you're actually cutting away some of your potential travellers because they can't take their bike on because they need it for the other end of their journey, the final mile, as well as their first mile. So it's enabling and making sure that we understand what those needs are.
Mm-hmm. And what, from a sort of a technology perspective, to make that easier, I'm thinking sort of customer information systems and I guess interchange management systems. What needs to be in place in order to make that a seamless experience, do you think?
Yeah, it's got to be, and this is where if any of my colleagues from DFT are on here, we'll be smiling because we've always been told, that they have to be mode agnostic, and then that's what we need to how we need to approach it. Is it shouldn't matter what mode people are getting on their journeys, that it's seamless. They can see the routes, they can see their options, and that is a big win. It doesn't matter if I've got to go bus, tram, train, or bus, train. Yeah, it's like here are my options, and it shouldn't matter that but if I go that way, I've got to go through the lift, or I can't park my bike there. It needs to have all that information so they can choose the best route, which is better for them. And we've got a lot better with saying, here are your journey options, but it's even down to the specifics of you can leave your bike here or you can't leave your. It's giving as much information as possible to give the people the confidence that when they rock up there, it's going to be what they're expecting. There's no, where do I put my bike? Oh, where do I put my suitcase? Where do I, it's that information flow that is key.
And with that,
just listening. Sorry,
Rob.
Philippe, just to jump in. Just listening to that. The technology to do that, it kind of exists today. We could that cross mobility, e-scooters if they're kind of approved, e-bikes, all of that. You can get that in. You can get end-to-end ticketing. I think now it's possible, and I think you can also have demand responsive transport to get you kind of to the location as well. It's kind of works more in rural areas, probably a little bit subsidized as well. But when I kind of spoke to some operator of a demand responsive transport system, they kind of said that some people, travel on that. There's various different reasons, but one of the reasons was there's someone who just wants the certainty to use an app, to use their phone, to know where exactly they're going. They don't have to turn up to a station and look at the platform and say, "Oh, when's the bus going to be here?" In it's 10 minutes, and then it doesn't turn up. They want that certainty. They don't necessarily want to kind of speak to a driver and pay and all that kind of stuff. They just want it on their phone and really simple. And that is possible. And that's the kind of exciting bit earlier, kind of about passenger experience. The world, the core tram system is going to be, if we're delivering one today, it's going to be the same in 30 years' time, as you said, James. These systems last a long time. But imagine what the world is going to be like in 30 years' time outside of that, core system. The possibilities are endless, and that is the exciting bit, I think, where if you kind of, with a bit of an imagination and a bit of kind of dedicated thought, you could really do something interesting, virtual reality of the tram that you're getting on, a kind of walk through the station that you're going to before you get there when you're at home, all of these things, that's probably possible today. It's probably the cost that holds that back. But these things are just going to become so much easier. As a user of AI quite a lot, it's just advanced so much in the last few months. So I think that's the exciting opportunity to build that ridership on the core system. Is what are those things that we can build to really help passengers to do what James was talking about.
Get rid of the travel anxiety, that you can see where you've got to go, where you're heading, and the amount of people that I hear, sadly, I do a lot of train travel and turn around and say, "Oh, I don't know, I can't find my seat, I can't find this, I don't know which way the train's going." Yeah, and they go, "Oh, no wonder I normally drive." And you're thinking, "Oh, this is where that's another customer gone." And it's like, we need to be doing the reverse of that. We need to make it as easy as possible. As you say, technology's there, but it's how we build that and make sure that we keep evolving it, as you say. Is it that we've all got the glasses that we put on and it shows you where you've got to go, gives you the route maps. You haven't even got to be walking, following your phone, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
As you say, the developments. If you look back how far we've come in the last few years, and you look at how that can be in the next 30 years when we maybe need a new set of trams to replace the next fleet. What's going to be entailed in that? It'll be people charging up their sky glasses or whatever they may be.
And that's, I mean, I think what you've both described there is a wonderful vision of the future from a passenger perspective. And but what about from what does that mean from an operational perspective? Because there's an enormous amount of to a certain extent complexity where you have to, in order to make that on the outside seem utterly seamless. There's a lot of integration and talk about cost. We talked about capital expenditure, but what about operational expenditure? Is when you're building the tram of the future, what do you need to do to be able to make it seamless without breaking the bank on operational costs? And is that possible?
I think with a lot of it, we see so much data coming off systems these days. We know where the trams are on a network at any one time. The technology is there to see how busy it is. We're starting to see it on the trains where you can see how full the carriages are. When they come into the station, and it's stuff like that the technology is there. That the cost shouldn't be huge. It's making sure that that's being incorporated from the start. Going back to what Rob was saying about that, what do we want this to be doing at the end, and what data? Because you can have reams and reams of data, but what is actually telling you? What do you want to know? What is going to be the benefit of the? Well, actually, I can tell you that tram is on its way. It's 2 minutes late, but it's back end of the back of the tram is empty. So if you're going on with your bike, go towards the back of the tram, and that'll be here in this part of the platform. That's sort of stuff. It should be huge because it can use the cameras that are on the trams, to scan what's on board already. So the cameras are on there, but it's having that foresight of, right, okay, where's that data going? What's that got to go through, and how can that then feed back in? And systems seem to be able to be talk to each other a lot better these days than they did in the past. Which go, well, my camera system won't talk to this, so we can't get the information off of it. But it's having that open mind and that almost that open access to the data, but it's focusing on the data that you want to know.
Absolutely, no, definitely. Rob, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about sort of systems integration from perhaps a sort of an interchange or station management perspective, whether that's relevant here.
Yeah, well, I guess yes. I guess integrated transport. James talked about taking the step back and kind of thinking not just about the tram system, but what we're trying to achieve. And it might be that the best form of integration is kind of getting the trams to run on the heavy rail network as well as the light rail network. So, but yeah, you can definitely think about that. Collecting, you can put in place the technology where the tram stop control and the heavy rail system and the bus system can all be controlled by the same station operators. So you've got that one, span of control that people are thinking. They're not just thinking about the mainline station. They're thinking across everything, and that would drive a culture change in itself. Kind of, you'd think, well, the worst bit about this whole area is getting from here to here, and then you'd think, oh, well, we better solve that, because we have a crush at that. But so I think there's definitely a role to play there.
And I think adding on from that, we look at these transport networks. If you're looking more holistically across everything, it's the same with asset management. We're understanding, how stuff's performing. If we're using more predictive maintenance, then we can get, reliability up on more. So which goes back to the end, customer experience. Is if we can utilize the same stuff, because whether it be a train or a tram or a bus depot or whatever it may be, station, is that we're tending to look at the same things here, and if we are looking at that in a common language and we understand that, then you're not looking at, hang on, one part of that integrated transport journey is always weaker. It's like, oh, it'd be great, but the bus never turns up because there's a queue back at the charging station or at the petrol station or whatever it may be. It's like understanding that you're only as good as your weakest link. So if you're talking in that big picture, you want to make sure if we can all get on that, that same page in terms of how we manage assets and how we use that information to pass to the passenger, but also that we talk about the updates. To me, the live thing is, well, actually, yes, your bus has been delayed, but stay on the tram for two more stops and then swap on to the number 14
Yeah.
bus here, rather than you were going to go on the number 15 from there. It's that live time. It's that where are you going, what you're trying to do, and that information's there. And that's where I see AI playing a big part in going, actually, your options better here now. A bit like when you're driving along and your sat nav tells you, actually, there's a delay here. Do you want to reroute? It's using that technology for your journey as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose is there, or are you seeing any examples, perhaps sort of internationally, or any sort of shining examples of that sort of happening already, and if so, where?
Whenever I'm very lucky in that we UKTram, we represent the UK internationally with UITP and other transport bodies across the globe, and so I do get to see quite a few international cities. And yes, definitely got some catching up to do, in especially from the basics of ticketing. So many of the cities that you go to, you buy one ticket, it doesn't matter what mode you've got on, you've got the choice. They're not there yet in telling you where your best, sometimes you have the options of routes, but sometimes a little bit confusing. It's kind of like, here are your options. You go, well, actually, what is my better one? Which one's going to actually be, because I might look and then find that there's a massive, set of stairs to go to this one, or you've got to go down the escalator to the underground, and my knees aren't good or whatever. It's like, they're getting there, but they're not at that utopian view yet. But yeah, there's definitely the newer systems. They've always got the advantages because they can build it in. It goes back to what we were saying earlier on. If you can build it in from the beginning, you've got that data and you've got that information. So when you get there, there's a lot more information than just stood there on a transport. Well, is this turning up, or where do I? What happens if I miss this one and this one doesn't turn up? Where do I go next? You know, but at the same time, no one's got it perfect. I wouldn't say there is a shining example. There's good examples of where they've gone with the technology and how they've improved it, but I haven't been to one place where I've gone, we need that. There's elements everywhere, and I think it's where we've got to be fairly open to. It is, we don't have to design it all here. We've got to look across, and that's where it comes from the other modes as well. Certain elements of maybe what they're doing in the airlines, or what they're doing on boats or whatever, it has a part to play. Is actually, if someone's got a good idea, or like Uber, when it updates you, your driver is and it's tracking you across there, your tram is approaching the station. I was on the Isle of Man last week, and you could actually see where all the buses and the trams and the trains were live on there. So people were stood at the airport stressing because, oh, when someone said it's about 10 minutes away, I can see it on the map. So I was quite relaxed about it, but no one else had known that you could track it. So again, it's that information, it's being aware of how you can feed that information in, but it should be at people's fingertips. You shouldn't have to go looking for it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's and I've got a question here that's come up around having as I understand it, I think I'm just slightly interpreting the question, but um, I think it's to do with so part of the problem is that there's no single design standard that exists across tram, rail, bus interchange. So every scheme reinvents it. and passengers get a different language at every stop. Now, so as I understand that, that's more about sort of the design language rather than the technology. But I think obviously technology underpins that as well, doesn't it? And is there appetite for doing that across the UK, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's it's one of our main drivers, us and LRSSB, is to try and get stuff more standardized. I mean, recently, would you believe we actually did a document on standardizing the overhead line terminology because everyone was called not everything, but there's certain parts of people were referring to differently. So when you're having a technical meeting, someone was referring it to something different. Even to OLE, overhead line equipment, people put an H in there because overhead line equipment, even the sector wasn't talking the same language. So how do you expect that to work then across the modes? So yes, we are trying to do it in the sector with the view of having it across the modes because obviously we want it to be seamless. When you get off of one mode to another, that your card readers, what are they called? To tap on, tap off. What are you doing? It might be in the future that it's just scans your eyes, to charge your bank account. But yeah, it needs to be the same because everyone's got a different approach. Some you just tap on, some you tap on and tap off. Some you have to say where you're going to the driver or the ticket person. Others you just tap the card and it works out where you've gone to when you tap off. And everywhere's different, and we've got to start standardizing that. You see it in the cities, like I go around London, but as soon as you get out of London, it's different where you go elsewhere. And it's the tram systems, you get off them currently at the moment. Some have got conductors, some haven't. Some you buy before you board, some you can still buy when you're on board. And it's just like, again, it's that even if you do need those differences, it's informing customers of what the differences are, so you don't have that, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not getting on it. And it's having that um you know that common goal. That's where we want to get to. We're not going to get there tomorrow, but while we're talking about what the tram system in the future looks like, then that's what we want it to be. We want it to be the same across every town, city, wherever there is a light rail system, but over a transport network. So it doesn't matter if you're getting on a bus or a train, it's the same rules of carriage almost, no smoking, no drinking, da. So there is that ease of, I know what's expected when I'm on this vehicle.
Mhm. Absolutely. No, definitely. And so, because I'm conscious that we're sort of almost coming up to the hour now, and I guess to sort of summarize, it feels like, I mean, first of all, I guess the question is, do we think a tram system built today can meet tomorrow's demands? And I think by the sounds of things, it can, but it needs to, in order to do that, it needs to have, or that it needs to observe a series of principles, if you like, some of which are around standardization. Some of it is around making sure that the technology that is or the technology that's implemented isn't as causes as least disruption as possible. And that involves things like off-site testing, etc. And and then the experience needs to be seamless across modes, across places like interchanges, etc. So therefore, integration needs to be a key sort of principle here. Are there any other sort of principles that we've talked about that you think actually the industry should really think about when building something today for evolving needs, as it were?
I think you kind of touched on quite a lot of that there. I think that we talked about earlier, spending a bit more time upfront planning and considering the longer term outcomes. So making sure that your system is scalable. So, for example, our kind of overhead line system can cope with kind of higher speeds and higher capacities. So if in the future you want to run more trams at a higher speed, you can do that. So design the components in that allow you to do that. I think the other thing is, and I know there's a cost to this, so we need to think about the lowest cost way of doing it is, but it's about maintaining the capability. So I don't, as a company, we don't really want to deliver a system and then walk away. We want to deliver a system that we can then kind of support help to upgrade, manage, maintain the capability, as well. So I think that is a key critical success factor, is kind of thinking about how this kind of relationship lasts beyond the capital kind of element, and building in that, and also building in that capability for that tram network as well. So we're building kind of expertise in delivering that, and then maybe they can transition into maintaining and operating that, and we can do some kind of sharing on that. The other thing I say, offsite testing is not just good for delivering; it's actually quite good for supporting and expanding. So we are in the process of moving 20-year-old rigs with appropriately looking retro computer hardware from our old site to our new site, and they are running kind of digital twins. They probably weren't called that back in 20, 30 years ago, but they're running some of TfL's lines, and we've maintained them so that we can do data alterations to the system. If there's a track layout change, we can alter that. So those kind of integration rigs can be used for the life of the system, and you just got to think about that at the start. And then the one thing we haven't talked about, which is probably a boring kind of note to end on, but sorry about that, obsolescence. You kind of have to think about the obsolescence up front. The core, the bits that we could buy 20 years ago, you can't buy anymore, and that is not going to get any better with the pace of change in chips and all of that kind of stuff. So building that in from the start and thinking about how you kind of manage the system through the whole life cycle, is it's not something that is free, but it is something that will be good value for money in the long run.
Yeah, and it's got to be part of that, of that plan, is that you rather than, we've bought the tram, now it's going to last us 30 years, is yes, we've bought it, but we know that the cameras will need changing it here, but it'll be it's being aware of that's what's going to be coming up, and that technology is going to move on. With the camera systems, at the time you put one on and then the next one, well, actually they moved on again. It's like you need to keep up with that. But on the flip side, when we're talking about that preparing for the future, and one of the key things, and it came up briefly in conversation before, and I was going to talk a little bit more about it, but just to flag back up, is that we need to make sure that we've got the people to be able to look after these systems in 30 years' time as well, which is huge. And you talk about what we've been going through today, and there's a lot of exciting stuff to be done. One of the key things we do have to do as a sector, and across the whole of public transport, is to make sure that the next generation know that there's opportunity to do exciting things like this, to keep those young people coming in, to keep the systems going, and to innovate and make sure that when we've retired, when we're well in retirement, that the next generation are coming along and keeping these systems still running, and for the next generations and those to come.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important note to close on, really, because it is talk about changing customer needs. They are the customers of the future and the operators of the future. So it's so important to make sure that we have that talent coming through. Brilliant. Well, look, first of all, I'm going to say a huge thank you, James, to you for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to impart all your knowledge and expertise on the sector, and thank you also to Rob for joining us and sharing your insight as well. And a huge thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation, and if you do have any other sort of thoughts or questions, do get in touch with us. And then final thank you is to Interchange for putting this on. It's a great organisation, a great sort of movement, if you like, and a great platform to have these kind of really important conversations. So huge thank you to Interchange. And a final plug: Interchange is back on the 2nd and 3rd of March next year. So do make sure that you attend. So on that note, I'm going to close today, and thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Philippe. Yeah, thanks, James.